All right. Um, and if you have any concerns about that, feel free to just send me a note after the meeting. We're while everything is technically off the record, if there's something that you don't want included in the specific first hour recording, we're happy to accommodate that. So we're gonna do breakout sessions today, and we're gonna actually allow you to navigate yourself into the breakout rooms, and so you'll get assignments for those breakout rooms, and you'll be able to put yourself into the breakout room and then also rejoin us in the main room when the breakout's over. All right. So this is the agenda that we've put together for you today. We have kind of a dialogue with Seth till about 2 o'clock. And then we're going to do 2 breakout sessions, each for 15 minutes. And these are the discussion questions that we've put together for your breakout sessions. And each of these questions will be included in the chat within your individual breakout sessions, so you won't need to specifically remember these things. And we're just asking that once you go into your breakout sessions that you kind of organize collectively. So that would be naming a moderator and a note taker and being prepared to report back in the afternoon. So happy to take any questions. You can send me a chat throughout today's event. And I also have taken these 2 slides and I'll send you a link to them in the meeting chat also in case you want to take another look. All right, and so now I get to have the great pleasure of introducing Seth. Seth Turner is the Director of Citizen Engagement at the Congressional Management Foundation. At CMF, Seth oversees efforts to improve engagement between citizens and Congress. He directs CMF's advocacy training initiatives, including its partnership for a More Perfect Union, which provides participating organizations with resources, tools, and trainings to promote meaningful civic engagement between their citizens and their congressional representatives. Prior to joining CMF in 2016, Seth had served as a policy professional in several national nonprofit organizations, including Goodwill, Catholic Charities, the National Youth Employment Coalition, and the Association for Career and Technical Education. Seth, so glad to have you with us. And as I mentioned, I was just going to ask you to confirm that you're fine with taking questions as we go along.
Yes, please.
Okay. And I guess the other thing that we might want to do is a quick round of introductions so that we, because I'm not sure if we all know each other, and certainly this is our first time meeting you. So, sorry, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I think my screen's already shared.
There you go. Okay.
Sharing.
So,
I've got my audio going.
Yeah. So let me just call on people to do some introductions here. So I'll start with just so that on my screen here, Michael Morgan, Beth Cunningham, and then David Help.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Morgan. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm a member of the AIP Board of Directors and chair of their Public Policy Advisory Committee.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Good afternoon. I'm Beth Cunningham, the Executive Officer of the American Association of Physics Teachers.
I'm David Helfand, a professor at Columbia University and chair of the board of AIP and AIP Publishing. And I want to thank you for being here because, as Michael said, I've been asking questions that you're about to address for about 2 years.
All right. Next, I have Mel, Katie, and Rudy.
Hi, I'm Mel Sabella. I'm a physics professor at Chicago State University and working with AAPT, and I serve on the liaison committee for public policy. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
I'm Katie Wygant. I work at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Gaithersburg. I am a member of the Society of Rheology and serve on the liaison committee for public policy.
Sorry for interrupting. My name is Rudy Ludeke, and I'm a retired physicist who spent a career at IBM Research. I'm a member of the AVS, among other societies, and also a member of the Public Policy Advisory Committee of AIP.
All right, next I have Mitch, Ed, and Ann.
Hello, I'm the director of AIP's Science Policy News Service called FYI.
Hi, I'm Ed Walsh, the chair of the panel on public policy at the Acoustical Society of America and direct the auditory neurobiology lab at the VA Loma Linda Healthcare System.
And hi, I'm Ansel Husky. I'm the Vice President for Commercial Civil Space at Lockheed Martin Space. So I bring an industry perspective, but prior to that, I was also the staff director for the Subcommittee on Science and Space for the US Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. So I was on the receiving end of all the things that we're talking about today. So can ground truth some of those tactics.
That's very cool.
All right, next I have Susan, Joel, and Ruth.
Hi, I'm Susan Burkett, president of AVS this year and retired electrical engineering professor from University of Alabama, also on the AIP board.
I'm Joel Bregman. I'm chair of the Liaison Committee on Public Policy of the AIP and the American Astronomical Society, chair of public policy and professor at University of Michigan.
That everybody?
I'm gonna unmute Ruth. I didn't hear. I just can't seem to be able to do it for some reason.
I hit unmute.
Excellent.
I'm Ruth House. I'm retired chair of the physics department at Marquette University, and I work with AAPT, and I'm on their liaison committee for public policy.
All right, next I have Vic, Richard, and Mark.
Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Vic Sparrow. I'm a faculty member of acoustics at Penn State. I'm also one of the people standing up an ad hoc committee on advocacy for the Acoustical Society of America.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Martin. I'm with the American Association of Physicists in Medicine. I staff their government relations function, and I'm an attorney by trade.
I'm Mark Belcester. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for APS, and good to see you, Seth.
Hey, Mark.
APS has been working with CMF for, I don't know, at least a handful of years now. So nice to see you.
I think
again.
about 3 years now, but yeah. I think that's about right.
All right, next I see Ben, Diana, and Stephen.
Howdy, y'all. I'm Ben Tannenbaum with Sandia National Laboratories. Excuse me. I do government relations work supporting our Advanced Science and Technology Division. I manage Sandia's Washington office. In my copious free time, I am adjunct at George Washington. And 2 decades ago, I was an APS fellow working for Ed Markey when he was over in the House.
I'm Diana Tomczyk. I'm a professor of biophysics at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and I'm the vice president of the American Crystallographic Association.
I'm Stephen Sheriff. I'm the American Crystallographic Association representative on the Liaison Committee for Public Policy of the AIP, and I work at Bristol Myers Squibb, which is a pharmaceutical company.
All right, Vanessa, Kristen, and Brandy.
Hey, I'm Vanessa Bridges. I'm the meeting planner for AIP, so putting a face to all the emails you've probably received from us. Thank you for joining us today. If I can help you with any technical difficulties, feel free to reach out.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Averett. I am the State Climate Policy Coordinator for Nevada, and I am the representative from the American Meteorological Society, where I am a policy fellow.
I'm Brandy Dillingham. I work in the Government Relations Department for the Optical Society.
All right, who did I miss? John Lannon?
Hi, I'm John Lannon. I'm the General Manager at Micros Advanced Interconnect Technology in RDP, North Carolina. My affiliation is with AVS. I'm on the Education Committee, both in the Educational Materials and Outreach, and as well as on the Short Course Committee for AVS, and am part of the AIP Venture Fund Advisory Committee.
Is there anybody that I overlooked? All right, thank you all so much for coming, and we'll hand it over to Seth.
Well, great. That's I'll tell you, quite a list of people, and I'm looking at these introductions, and kind of an intimidating bunch of very smart, obviously very smart people. And now my dog has decided that this is the moment that he's going to start being a pill and bark a little bit. So anyway, apologies for that. Hopefully they'll settle down. Really great to be here today to talk to you about, advocacy and answer any questions that you may have about it. I'm thrilled to be here today. Just a real quick intro for me. Jen covered a lot of it. I've 20-something years of working at national nonprofit organizations in policy, and then coming to CMF about a little over 5 years ago. And we do sort of three things. The first thing that we do, and we were founded to do, is we work with Congress. We provide professional development and kind of training to help them be better and more effectively managed. Our philosophy is that better managed offices in Congress hopefully means that Congress actually produces better products. In the course of doing that, we do a lot of surveys of congressional offices and even members of Congress themselves. And so I'm going to share with you quite a bit of research that we have gathered over the course of the years to kind of inform, the presentation and also just inform some of the tactics and questions that you may have. And then, so a lot of research, we started studying effective communication between citizens and Congress several years ago, and we realized that that body of research would be really helpful to provide also to the advocacy community. And so we also launched the third part of the house, which is the citizen engagement. We do a number of trainings and things like that over like this one over the course of the year. And we believe that we estimate we've had about at least 95,000 individuals that have participated in one of our training programs over the course of the year since 2014, when we started counting. Okay, so let's kind of just jump into it. When I've had conversations with people about advocacy, I kind of look around the audience. I mean, back in the days when I could actually look around the audience, in a live audience, and you kind of see four categories of individuals out there in the audience. So I'm just going to see, you probably fit into one of these four, and hopefully, we'll address sort of your concerns based on, regardless of which category you fall into. So the first category is this category right here, illustrated by, the Kool-Aid guy. I think most of you might be old enough to remember the Kool-Aid guy who'd come bursting through the wall because he's so excited. Oh yeah, right. You have a lot of people that are just really, really enthusiastic about engaging with their members of Congress. Can't wait to go and meet with them. They're literally slurping up the Kool-Aid that you're serving. Then you've got this group right here, illustrated by this little kitty cat on the fence. You have people who are on the fence. They're a little cynical. They're not quite sure whether or not this whole advocacy thing is really, really all it's cracked up to be, but they're willing to at least give you the benefit of the doubt. Next, you've got people like this, people who are looking at this whole prospect of meeting with their members or engaging with members of Congress like deers in the headlights. They're totally intimidated by it. It makes sense. If you come to Washington, D.C., I mean, it was designed to kind of for foreigners, foreign diplomats and such to come in and feel a little bit, like it was daunting and be a little intimidated. And so there are a lot of people that come in from wherever it is that they happen to live and work, and they're pretty intimidated by the prospect of meeting with a member of Congress or engaging with the member or even the staff. And then lastly, you've got this fourth category here. People who are pretty cynical, they're pretty much checked out. They have made up their mind. They don't think that advocacy matters. Maybe they're in this meeting because, you know, their boss sent them there or something like that. They have to go. They're going to do what they have to do. They're going to check the box, but they're kind of really, you're hoping that, you know, they can get this over with as soon as possible so that they can get out onto the, you know, maybe go golfing or something like that. So, you know, regardless of what category you might fall into, you know, hopefully we'll have some, we'll be able to answer some questions and maybe address some of those concerns. So the cynicism thing, you know, obviously there's a lot of cynicism out there. There was a survey that was done, this public opinion survey that was done by the Rasmussen Group several years ago, where they asked this question in a public opinion poll. They asked, do most members of Congress care what their members of what their constituents think? So when we saw that question, and we actually decided to ask that question only from the other side of the lens. So in a survey of actual members of Congress themselves, we asked this question here: please rate how important each aspect is to your effectiveness as a member of Congress. And so I just thought I would kind of share with you what the findings from both of those survey questions. So when it comes to, you know, does Congress care what constituents think? Pretty sad that 9 out of 10 Americans basically don't believe that their members of Congress care what they think, that basically their voice doesn't matter in the democratic process. It's really kind of a sad figure there. But yet, look at this figure here. Members of Congress think 95% of the members of Congress that were surveyed believe that keeping up in touch with constituents is a really important aspect of their job. As a matter of fact, it's the #1 scoring answer. And I'm honestly kind of scratching my head looking here going, I don't know where the what the 5% were thinking, you know, who didn't say that this is a really important aspect of their job. I can tell you where they're not, though, is they're not probably members of Congress anymore. Because it's that important. Ask, you know, Eric Cantor. He was, you know, a young gun, amongst the Republican House leaders several years ago, and you know, his constituents around Richmond decided, you know, they felt like he was out of touch with the district, and they sent him home. And so it really is an incredibly important aspect. But you can see here, there's a real gap between the perception of the public perception of Congress in terms of like whether or not members of Congress care what they think, and what members of Congress actually think about keeping in touch with constituents. And, you know, there are lots of reasons for this cynicism here. I like to blame, you know, shows like House of Cards. You know, for those of you who aren't familiar with that show, it was on several years ago. But, you know, it's about this really kind of underhanded, seedy politician named Frank Underwood. Turns out he was actually played by an actor that was even seedier, named Kevin Spacey. But, you know, shows like that, you know, show that they basically kind of portray Washington as sort of like all the decisions get made in these smoke-filled rooms with power brokers, you know, and that doesn't demonstrate citizens engaging with those members of Congress. There are also trends in the media. There's actually a study that came out several years ago where they found it's actually 22 states now where they don't have a dedicated reporter to cover Capitol Hill and translate, you know, what's going on Capitol Hill to, you know, local districts and states. And so if you happen to live in one of these states that's represented in white here, it means that you're you know, kind of having to read national papers to get that kind of content, and you don't have a dedicated reporter that's translating what's happening on Capitol Hill and kind of talking and doing the analysis for what that means for you locally in your district or state. It also, in my opinion, means that citizens, in these states, it's incredibly important for them to be communicating with those members of Congress from those states, because those members of Congress don't have access to that resource either. And so they really need to be hearing from constituents to be able to kind of understand what the impacts of legislation or pending legislation or issues are, so that they can their views. So here's what we're going to talk about through the rest of the day. I'm going to do a little bit about sort of the current environment on Capitol Hill. We're also going to talk about, you know, the information that Congress needs Congress to provide that frankly lobbyists can't. We're also going to talk about how to conduct effective meetings and virtual advocacy as well. I'm going to hit you with quite a bit of research over the course of the conversation. You'll get some tips along the way. And yeah, as Jennifer said, Jen said, please ask questions. It's frankly a lot more, it's easier for me to answer a question when the slide's a little bit more, recent and relevant versus waiting to the end. And it also allows me to take a little sip of water or soda or something like that, so I don't have the kind of weird Marco Rubio moment. Jen, if I could ask you a favor, because I cannot see the chat box when I'm in this kind of share mode. So if you wouldn't mind just monitoring the chat box and for those questions, and just, raise your hand or just interrupt me and ask your question. I see we have Ben. So Ben Tannenbaum, you have your hand up. You have a question?
Thanks, Seth. I wanted to go back to your slide where you had 11% of constituents feel that Congress listens to them and 95% of Congress feels they listen to their constituents. I feel like there's a reason why they listen to their constituents, right? And it's to be reelected. And right, but I feel like there's a perspective among constituents that some voices are more important than others.
Well, yeah, I mean, so we do, go talk to the founding fathers that we do have a, representative democracy. And so, of course, keeping in touch with constituents, that is, they are their voters. And that's, of course, why they believe it's such an important reason for them to be representing their views and in touch with them. And to a degree, you are right that it's not that, there was actually another study that was done where they found that only 14% of the members of Congress actually appeared on Meet the Press in 1 year. And so you can kind of think about that. If you happen to be, actually it was only 11%. 11% of the members of Congress actually were on Meet the Press that year. And so you think about that, if you happen to be represented by the other 89%, you do start to get that perspective of, there are certain members of Congress that are the most important and everybody else is sort of out, kind of a backbencher type of thing. And to an extent, there is a degree of, some members matter more in terms of like, what committees they're on, if they happen to be in leadership positions. And that's why it's also really important for constituents to know who their members are, know what committees they happen to be on. So, if they happen to be on like the, Commerce Science Committee, that's a really important committee. If you happen to have a member who's on that or chairs that committee, because actually, frankly, you are in a more influential position to influence legislation because of the.
This is relevant to Seth's discussion, but it's referring to a paper that came out a while back by Page and Gillens. They're faculty at, I think one of them's at least at Princeton, and they looked at three groups, sort of so-called average citizens, economic elites, and interest group alignments on policy preferences. And they tried to, by looking at the research, basically indicated that average citizens' policy preferences, whether, almost virtually there's no preference at all in a particular policy, to 100% support for that policy, it's a flat line across that in terms of the probability that that policy would be adopted. But if you're in a group that's so-called economic elites, you can go from 0 to 35% in terms of the interest, the probability that this policy would be adopted. And interest groups also seem to have some sway with respect to policy. But average citizens, in terms of the way they did their study, and I'm not a social scientist in this, but it seemed like there's very little impact. And so it seems like this discussion is really pertinent to what we're trying to do, because at some level we are an interest group and there is at least some sway that we might have on policy.
Well, how much do you think that matters with just understanding the process, right? Because I find that people who understand the process are overall more optimistic about the impact.
That could very well be the case. And this is a paper that's been out for several years. I haven't read it recently, but yeah, I think if you understand the impact, you understand how the process works, you probably are going to be more optimistic about things happening. But the prediction was, at least for the average citizen, it didn't have any impact.
But I have a computer. I'm actually going to have a different computer. I'm working through it. Can you all hear me now?
It's still pretty choppy at this point, so.
Sounds like your microphone's having a problem, Seth. I'm not sure it's bandwidth. It
And
just.
you're Your camera's still on right at this moment.
Trying to switch microphones and it's not allowing me to do that.
I'm sorry, say that again, Seth?
I think he's frozen now, Vanessa.
Oh, boy.
Okay, sorry, I had gotten him on the telephone. I'll call him back again.
Vanessa and I were talking earlier. I said, I've dealt with snowstorms and, transportation problems and people getting sick, but, long overdue surprise federal holiday. It's just like you can't necessarily plan for every contingency. And so, this is what's happening with Seth also.
So Anne, I take it from your comment that you were saying that you think folks that are familiar with the process are going to be perhaps more optimistic about having an impact and actually having a more of an impact.
Yeah, so we work with our suppliers a lot on an annual basis, and getting them to engage with their members and things like that. And it's night and day once you walk them through the process. And so they tend to start out somewhat skeptical of why am I bothering and what's the goal here, and then where they end up is actually having more influence than like the large companies like the one that I work for, because all politics is local. And so you give them the process, show them how to make an impact, and then it's off to the races. And so I've seen the kind of a 180 where as people start to understand the old saying of how the sausage gets made. And so once they understand that process, they tend to be a lot more optimistic on the influence and the impact.
So Anne, can you be more specific what you mean by process in this instance? Do you mean like knowing to go to the appropriations committees at the right time, having suppliers that are in the state for the member that's the chair or ranking member, and have them go at the right time in the process to make the ask? Is that the sort of thing you mean?
Yeah, it's kind of all of the above. It's kind of meeting them where they are and then elevating their game, right? So, in our suppliers conference this past year, we had a new supplier out in California who has like 6 employees, and this was the first year they'd ever participated because it was virtual. And they could never take the time or money to send, with 6 employees, you're not going to send somebody to DC for 2 days, right? So the virtual format actually enabled some broader participation. And so like for them, when I had a conversation with them, I really walked through kind of the 101 because they thought they were going to be like alone in a meeting with a California senator. So that's not quite how it works. So let me walk you through the process, and then also showing them that like staff really matter. Sometimes people don't get members and then they think they're all disappointed they didn't talk to the member. And like, do not discount the impact of staff. And so so it really just depends on who you're talking to, but fundamentally across the board, I have found that getting them to the next level of understanding of how the process works, and then sharing my experience of how I use the data, right? The thing I used to hate the most were people that would come and just see me once a year. I'm like, okay, I see you next year, right? That's not really engagement, and you're not trying to influence anything. That's just a go do your congressional visits day and call it good. Like I was never a fan of those things. But the people who are willing to engage regularly to advance a consistent dialogue and move things forward was a very powerful combination.
Hi, everybody. Is this better?
Yeah.
All right. Thank God I didn't get rid of the old computer, because anyway, I had a new computer and it's just been an absolute terror. I'm going to go up and climb up a tall building and throw it off the top right after this. And if you'd all like to join me, feel free. Anyway, I really apologize for the delay in there. I know that we had some questions. Michael, you had a question, I thought. Did that get answered in the process, or?
We had a discussion on it, but I can reserve that for later if necessary.
Okay.
That's good.
So, we were talking about cynicism there, and now this PowerPointing it's almost loaded. I'm having to reload it from our server. So, let's kind of jump into, we talked about cynicism here. I can talk a little bit about, effective strategies. So we've actually had about what's influential and what isn't influential. And so one of the kind of prime ways that people engage in with their members of Congress, of course, is through email campaigns. And so we actually wanted to know what are the most effective and most influential strategies for engaging with members of Congress. And so what we asked was a question that goes like this. It goes, if your member or senator has not already arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might the following advocacy strategies directed at the Washington office have on his or her decision? And what we found was that only 3% of congressional staff actually said that forum email campaigns have a lot of influence. And we found that only 8% of congressional staff said that a campaign from a visit from a lobbyist has a lot of influence. Okay, so my presentation is coming up online. Let me see if I can start sharing the screen again, and we will go back to the, hopefully with a program that isn't going to be wonky like that anymore. Let's see here. I think I want this. Just making sure I get the right screen. That's hopefully you'll be able to see this pretty soon, which would be a okay, we're there. Do you all see the sort of cover slide right now? Okay.
Yes.
Let's run through all that. You've all seen that stuff. So we talked about the agenda. All right, here we go. Let me just talk a little bit about the environment on Capitol Hill. Obviously right now, the environment on Capitol Hill is really different than it was, even 18 months ago. And there are a couple of things at play. Obviously, COVID was one big thing. A lot of people, they've had a really exhausting year, but also, frankly, I think what's going to have a really lasting impact as well is, January 6th. And, the fact that that was a pretty traumatic event. I think a lot of people across the country who, may not live inside the Beltway might feel a little bit like, oh, that was a long time ago, but if you were a staff person there and you spent hours and hours under your desk or barricaded in a room, it wasn't that long ago. And so in terms of long-term impacts, what we do know is that members of Congress actually feel like they're going to be using virtual technology a lot more. But when it comes to that whole trauma, we actually asked this question in a poll of congressional staffs about maybe a month or so ago. We asked, which of the following do you personally experience on a daily or near daily basis? And this is really kind of overwhelming, is that about 45% said that they feel anxious for their own safety or that of their members. So almost half feel basically fear for their life on a daily basis. But also, and then they also are fielding death threats, with almost 6 out of 10, are fielding death threats on a daily or near daily basis. But here's what's kind of fascinating is they also, the majority of them feel like, they're kind of frustrated because they wish they could do more to help the people that they serve. And so they really do see themselves as public servants, but it's a pretty tough time to be working on Capitol Hill. Also, here, this is kind of a typical scene of what people think of, typically about a member of Congress. So this is another scene from my favorite show, House of Cards, with my friend Frank Underwood there. It looks like he's got a pretty cushy job. Looks like he's sipping on some single malt scotch from, with some of his cronies here. This is actually a much more accurate depiction of a congressional office. This is Mike Quigley, Representative Mike Quigley. He represents a suburban district outside of Chicago. And what's he doing there? He's throwing a mattress on the floor because members of Congress work really long days. Their day usually starts around 6 a.m. and can last, well into the late hours of the evening. And so at the end of a long day like that, a lot of members of Congress just decide, I'm done with it. I want to get in a car and go go back to some hotel room, we'll just sleep on the floor. It's not a management tip that we actually recommend, but it is, the reality of for a lot of members. Also, think about that long day, an average number that they meet, the average number of meetings that any member of Congress has on any given day is about 13 meetings a day. And that goes, that's in addition to, markups and press conferences and other things that they may be involved in. So that's why it's really important to, I'm going to skip through that stuff. That's fun stuff, but not necessary. Let's talk about staff. I know that we had a couple of people that were our former staff. Here's a pretty good image of a pretty good illustration of, some staff at work. As a matter of fact, I just found out that the person who's in that gray jacket standing up is a person that I used to work with. I thought it was him, but a person I used to work with back in my Catholic Charities days. His name's Dave Rapallo. But they're getting ready for a committee hearing or a markup. Kind of pouring over all the papers, and they've definitely, looks like they've worked probably worked a couple of all-nighters just to get all that paper in order, and they also work really long days with 28 meetings a day, and also in really closed, kind of cramped quarters. And so, it's important to keep in mind, staff as well. Something happened in the 90s, the internet was invented, and that really created made it so that there's a lot of, members of, or, congressional staff even work later hours because they're trying to keep up with the mail. Matter of fact, we actually estimate that the average number of constituent correspondence that the average office received between 2002 and 2010 increased between 200 to a 1,000% increase in constituent correspondence. So keeping up with the mail, they're really inundated with that. And that's actually one of the big priorities. If you want to look like you're keeping up and keeping in touch with constituents, I'll tell you how you make it feel like you're out of touch is if you don't respond to correspondence or you take too long to respond. And we know that constituent correspondence continues to be kind of off the hook. There's some data that we got from just one particular office. It's one of a DC metropolitan area district that gave us data from 2001, 2011, and 2017, their mail volumes. And in 2001, they only got about not even 10,000 emails. And by 2011, though, that had increased to 48,000. And by 2017, it had increased to 123,000 emails in that one given year. That's like 13 times the amount of email and letters that they got between compared to 2001. Okay, so staffing, that's why, one thing you may not realize, and I didn't know this until I got to CMF, is that staff has actually capped the average number of house staff that it's on law. It's actually capped at 18 per office. And the year that law went into effect was in 1974. That was a really long time ago. Let me just kind of put that into context for you. So in 1974, Gerald Ford was president. You could go and see The Godfather Part 2 in theaters. Barbra Streisand's "The Way We Were" was the #1 hit song in the country, and you could buy a gallon of gas for 55 cents. And oh, by the way, I look like this. A lot has changed there as well. Hopefully I'm a little bit better dressed than I was then in those days, kind of wearing those tragic 70s clothes there, getting ready for my birthday party, looks like. Anyhow, so congressional staff, we actually asked that question. This is the question I was talking about earlier when I was waiting for my presentation to kind of boot back up. We wanted to know what strategies are the most influential on undecided decisions. And here's what we saw there. So there's that 3% of congressional staff saying email has a lot of influence, only 3%, 8% say, only 8% say a lobbyist has a lot of influence. Individualizing, if you individualize your communication and provide sort of specific information that members of Congress look for, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, you can increase your influence by 10 times the amount. But here's really where you have a lot of influence. It's when when members of Congress are actually meeting or engaging with their constituents, and contact from constituents reps with 46%. That means VIPs, people who represent a lot of constituents, maybe somebody who's like the head of a society, or maybe somebody who chairs or is the head of a specific department, like a physical science department at a university. That would represent somebody there. So there are people in this conversation today that represent both of those groups.
Seth, can I ask a question about that?
Yes, please do.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
But was that the top answer, the 54%?
Yes. And actually,
Wow.
that's just a lot of influence. If it's if you also go to some influence or a lot of influence, it's actually 98%.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes more sense then, because
Yeah.
that's why I was wondering it was so low. A lot of, because it seemed 54% seemed a lot, seemed still low.
Yes, yes. I mean, well, that's just the ones that said a lot of influence. If you had, we had some influence, a lot of influence. And so if you combine those two, it's up in the 90s. Yeah, but it's definitely, it's the #1 answer. And we've actually asked that question over the course of a decade, and we always get the same data. It's always in the 90s there. So clearly, contact from constituents, reps, those meetings, those are the most important things. That's the most important thing or most influential thing that a constituent can do to influence their members.
Hey,
So
Seth,
yes.
sorry, before you move on, I just wanted to let you know we're gonna forego doing the breakout sessions and just kind of open it up for plenary discussion. So you
Sounds
have
good.
a little bit more time for your
Okay.
presentation, and then we'll have a little bit more time for group questions.
Okay, great. Thank you for telling me that, and I appreciate the flexibility there. I'm going to go and, afterwards, I will be having words with our IT guys. I guarantee you. Okay, so I talked about personalizing, and there's specific information that Congress really looks for their constituents to provide, and frankly, some of it lobbyists just frankly can't really provide that. So here's what they want to know. Here's the 4 things. Get ready to hit print screen. So first one is they want to know, what do you want me to do? Then they want to know, why do you want me to do that? Then they want to know, what are the local impacts of this? They want to know, like, how many people in my district that I represent will be affected by this? How many, what's the, how much money are we talking about in my district that's not going to be available? That sort of thing. They want to know local. They don't want to know the national numbers necessarily. We were actually in a panel one time where we had congressional staff, and they said that, and people got really upset, and they're like, look, we're a representative democracy. I care about the constituents, and I care about everybody, but we represent the people in our district. We want to know how it's affecting those people. That's our priority. And then lastly, they want to know personal stories. What are the personal stories that are relevant and connected to the issue? Was there a question?
Yeah, so on the question of local impacts, is that true if you're speaking to someone in their capacity as a chair or ranking member of a committee or a subcommittee? Is it still going to be locally driven or not?
When you get into, the chairs, they're definitely looking at things with a little bit more of a global, kind of perspective. However, there's still members of Congress that represent a specific district. And so, they're also thinking about how that impacts their own district as well, making sure that the interests of their particular local area are represented. Think about like appropriators, right? Like think about people like, this isn't always the greatest example because he's got a pretty checkered past, but think about like Robert Byrd, right? That guy brought back just billions and billions. I think it's 10 billion or 10-12 billion dollars over the course of his time during the Appropriations Committee back to West Virginia. And that's, he definitely had his own constituents in mind when, he was dealing with those appropriations bills, making sure that the funds that were, in those bills, that they would also, there would be projects and grant money that would be flowing into the state of West Virginia. Great question. Thank you for asking it. I cannot see anybody on the screen. I can only see my presentation screen right now because I'm working on a laptop, not the most ideal thing, but so just go ahead and just keep chiming in and let me know, if you have a question. Okay, so these are the 4 things. How do we know that? Well, it's because we asked this question here. We asked, how helpful is it for messages from constituents to include the following? And then we wanted to know how well constituents actually provide the information they're looking for. So we asked that question right there. How frequently do messages from constituents include the following? And here's what we found. So with information the bill would have about the impact on the district or state, 91% saying that that's helpful, but only 9% saying that that happens frequently. Same thing with personal stories with 79% and 18%. Start doing a little bit better with reasoning and specific asks, but you can see here that, if you are able to tell good personal stories that are relevant to the issue and provide that district specific impact data, you will be standing out way out in front of the rest of the crowd that's trying to get their member of Congress's attention. Okay, so let's talk about conducting effective meetings. And of course, you know, we're talking about virtual meetings as well. And as I talked about earlier, they do plan to be using virtual technology long after the pandemic has ended, because they've adopted it, you know, and they're using that technology. They've found that it's beneficial. There's some efficiencies to it as well. And also with their concerns for their safety, it also addresses that issue as well. So we know that virtual meetings are going to be here to stay for years and years and years. I talked about that. This is the meetings piece. So in meetings, we asked this question here. We want to know, you know, kind of what are some of the do's and don'ts of meetings. So we asked this question of legislative assistants and legislative directors. We asked how frequently do you experience the following in meetings with constituents? And so here's what we found. Amazingly, 23% said that they frequently experience a constituent that's rude in a meeting. You know, like you don't want to start off meetings with like, I pay your salary or something like that. I know nobody would do that here, but that is, you know, kind of unfortunate that almost 1 out of 4 feel like they've experienced frequently constituents being rude. 1 or more constituents was rude. Let's see here. What else have we got here? There we go. Didn't convey a personal story. I talked about that already, with 55% saying that frequently or somewhat frequently happens. Didn't know the member's relevant committee assignment. I'm going to talk about that real quickly in a bit. Was unspecific with their request for action. You know, the more specific that your request is, the better. Well, I once heard about a group that was that you know, their ask was like, ask tough questions in a hearing. That's not a very you know, specific ask, and it's one where it's really difficult to quantify and to understand whether or not you did it or not. They really want to have those more specific asks, like I want you to vote for HR 1234, or I want you to co-sponsor a piece of legislation. That's much more specific. One House staffer said that, this quote right here, the more specific ask, the better. So let's keep going on. No, too many talking points, too many topics. When I was at Goodwill, we actually had 8 talking points in the first flying event that we ever did. It was only my second day on the job, so it wasn't my fault. But you know, you water down your issues. So you want to go in and have a very, you know, you keep your meetings focused. And so that, you know, they understand. If you go in there with a laundry list of stuff, what ends up happening, you just water it down, and then you walk out of the meeting and they kind of scratch their head wondering, like, I don't even know what that meeting was about. So having too many talking points, you want to kind of keep it simple and concise. Too many participants in the meeting, even with virtual meetings, this can be an issue, right? If you go in there and you have like 50 people and you're doing the Brady Bunch effect, that's pretty overwhelming. Also, if you have too many people trying to talk and you know, have a verbal role in that in a meeting like that, that can be difficult. Of course, in person meetings, if you walk into a house office building or a house office with 12 people, which right now you can't, I think it's maximum of 5, but it's just, you know, they don't have the space and it's really overwhelming. So you want to kind of keep your meetings down to, you know, just the people who are really need to be there and actual add value to the meeting. Didn't know the member's history on the policy or issue. So I talked about the committee, didn't know relevant committee assignments, and now didn't know the member's history on the policy or issue. That means a lot of people basically don't do even the most basic research. Now I know you all are people that love to do research, and you would never make this type of mistake, but you want to go through and at least do some of the basic research on knowing who your member is, knowing what committees they're on, knowing, you know, whether or not they have a history or have taken positions on the issues that you care about. Nothing worse than going in and asking somebody to co-sponsor a bill and they say, I can't co-sponsor it. I actually is the author of the bill. True story. I've heard about that happening. One House staffer said, when coming in, please be informed about the member's record. Frequently, constituents groups come into DC meetings asking the member to take an action that he or she has already taken. Okay, let's keep moving on with didn't have the data on the impact of the district or state. Again, I kind of spoke to that already, so I won't beat that dead horse anymore. And then here's one that's really important. Didn't understand the negative consequences of their position or of the bill. You know, members of Congress, that first off, they want to make an informed decision on the issues. If you can't speak to, what the opposition's arguments are, they're going to want to go out and find out what they are, and they're going to go to the opposition. So you want to be able to speak to their position, because it gives you the opportunity to frame their position for the opposition rather than them getting to do it themselves. But also, if you go in there and they start asking you questions about, what some of the negative aspects are, and you can't even, really even acknowledge that or speak to that, that says, hey, I'm basically pitching you on something that's really kind of slanted and biased, and I haven't thought the whole thing through from other angles. And so that really kind of says to the member, that you're a pretty, not somebody that is necessarily the best resource and for them to be listening to on that particular topic, because you're just going in there sort of with your own slanted pitch, and they're in a position where they want to make good decisions, and being able to articulate and talk to, hey, I've thought about that actually, and here's why we land here. That tells them that you've done some thought, that you've given it some thought, and that you're acknowledging that some of the decisions they have to make are pretty tough ones, and they appreciate that. Okay, so here are some top 10 tips for just meetings with members, whether it's virtual or in person. So first one, you want to be clear on the goal. You want to know what it is that you're going in there for, and just stick to the plan. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, as the saying goes, right? You want to know who it is you're talking to. You want to have done that research, not just the member, but also do some research on the staff that you are going to be meeting with. You can go and look up their LinkedIn profile. You may have gone to the same school, or you may know some people in common. You want to know your issue. You want to represent and illustrate that, be able to articulate your issues well enough where they realize that you are somebody they can turn to for more information if they have more questions at a relevant time. Also, you want to connect that issue to the member's district. We talked about that. And here's a really important one: respect the staff. Can't tell you how many times when I was, doing the work at Catholic Charities or Goodwill or some other place in between, and we'd be doing a flying event, and somebody would come up to me, after we sort of handed out the schedules, and they'd be like, I only have meetings with staff. I'm not meeting with any members. And, staff, members of Congress, actually, frankly, they place a great deal of faith and trust in their staff. And if you go in disrespecting staff, I can guarantee you the member will find out about it, and they're going to, basically, it's like you're disrespecting the member of Congress themselves, kind of behind their back, because they feel like they're just such an extension of themselves. That's how much they trust their staff. Also, you want to keep it short. Your meetings are only going to be about 15-20 minutes, so you want to be able to deliver your message in like the first 5 minutes or so, little chit chat, and then get to the point. Members of Congress, staff, they're actually used to these meetings being really short and kind of like just really brief. And so, I usually just started my meetings with, I'm here to ask you this, just starting with that. I know it feels a little awkward for people who don't have meetings like that. Typically your meetings, maybe a half hour at the least, if not maybe an hour. And it feels like you're really whipping through it. But I guarantee you, the staffers, they're used to it. And so it's okay to just kind of get straight to the point and deliver your message. Never go off message. I one time was involved in a meeting where the person decided that instead of talking about housing, they were going to talk about the member's position on abortion. After a while of the staff person trying to get the meeting back on topic, the staffer just closed their binder and said, good night. This meeting's over. And that's a real loss, because that staffer basically didn't trust the Catholic Charities person that they were meeting with, for the duration of their career. Also, the less paper, the better. You want to go in with basically like a 1 to 2 pager. Anything more than that, it's going to go straight into the recycling bin. If you like reports, which I like to use reports too in meetings, I use them as a prop. Like kind of will refer to it. Maybe I'll have a report that's like my own personal copy. It's got like coffee stains on it and stuff. And you can refer to it. And hopefully they might even say, oh, that looks like a really interesting report. Can I get a copy of that? That gives you a nice follow-up item, right? But the less paper, the better. They really just want a 1 to 2 page issue brief. That's it. And then of course you want to make sure that you follow up right away. So when you're pulling together a meeting, this is basically kind of the basic formula. You want to make your connection. You want to provide that district impact data, tell a personal story, tell them your reasoning, not the national office's kind of wonk speak reasoning, but your own reasoning.
And then you want to have your ask. But there's also something kind of missing here. When I was looking at the slide earlier, when I first looked at this slide, somebody else developed it at first. And I was like, there's something missing here. It's something really important. You want to make sure you listen. You know, a lot of people actually, they'll go into meetings and they'll basically just have their talking points and they're kind of loaded for bear. They'll whip through their talking points and then they'll leave and they forgot to listen or even ask questions like, what do you think? You know, and staff people really like to be, and members, they like to be asked, you know, what it is that they think. And, you know, if they just have a meeting where somebody just talks at them and then leaves, that's not a relationship. That's just being talked at and lectured to. So that doesn't create a relationship. You also want to make sure that you do the follow-up as well. So, you know, your meeting is just a meeting. With the follow-up is actually what leads to an actual relationship, because you've had ongoing conversation with them. You're not just doing these meetings like once a year, check in the box type of thing. One survey question that we ask goes like this. We ask, when meeting with a group of constituents, it's part of the organized plan, indicate the helpfulness of these written materials. This has to do with, you know, how long the materials we wanted to know. And so what you can see here is that 1 to 2 pager is really what they're looking for. Anything longer than that, it's really going back in the recycling bin. And here's a tip that we got was, don't think leave behind, especially for virtual events. You don't want to think leave behind. You want to think read ahead. You want to send those issue briefs a few days before, 2-3 days before is fine, because the staffer, they want to, you know, do some research. They'll read that in advance of the meeting. And frankly, what it does is it basically kind of kickstarts your meeting, and you end up kind of getting to start about 5 minutes ahead of time, because you don't have to spend time kind of doing remedial education on an issue. They've read the issue brief. You can kind of just get right into the meat of the meeting. And especially for virtual, you know, they need to be able to see those because you have to have sent them so they can refer to them as your meeting. So send those issue briefs, those talking points, etc., in advance of the meeting. Okay, let's talk about video conferencing now. So there's some, you know, obviously when you're going to be doing a meeting and you're using a computer, I think it's evidenced by today. In my experience, right? I love this quote by Paul Ehrlich, you know, the era is human, but to really foul things up, you need a computer. And I would say I'm a living proof of that today, right? So let's talk about that. You know, first off, when it comes to video conferencing, there's some just sort of production things that you want to consider. So you want to make sure that you use a quality microphone and a good webcam, especially the microphone, as it was evidenced by my problems with my microphone today. You know, it's when you have a really gravelly, it's really, you know, when it sounds all staticky and stuff, it's really distracting and hard to understand. If they can't hear you, you know, that's a real problem. I think it's more important to have a good microphone than even to have a good video camera. You want to raise the camera up to eye level. This is not a flattering, you know, angle of anybody, including me, you know, looking straight up my nostrils there. You want to simulate eye contact. So you want to put that camera kind of up there in the kind of at the top where, you know, and position that video conferencing grid up kind of towards that camera. So you look like you're looking into the camera. You know, I'm looking at the video grid right now in this picture here, but it looks like I'm answering emails and multitasking, and that's definitely not, you know, something that you want to, you know, leave an impression of with your congressional offices, is that, you know, you don't care enough to in your meetings is to multitask, right? Also think about, you know, you want to dress the part. Don't wear a t-shirt like I'm wearing in this picture here. And also, you know, think about the stage, right? You get rid of the dirty laundry. And if you can't get rid of the dirty laundry, or, you know, you can't deal with the background, use a virtual background. I'm not a big fan of virtual backgrounds myself, but I was able to make this background, you know, in like 5 minutes or something like that. And it's definitely a lot better than, you know, kind of having a dingy background with dirty laundry if that's an issue. Let's talk about some of the tech tips. Boy, I'm gonna be living proof of some of these as well. First off, you know, keep it simple. You know, if something's gonna go wrong, technology is definitely gonna, you know, throw a curveball at you. So the more and more kind of technology and more complicated it gets, the worse it's gonna, you know, the more complicated, you know, more likely that things are gonna go wrong. You want to practice and test everything, right? So you want to test the technology. You know, get on early, test your audio. You want to have backup for everything. Thank God I had a backup computer today, right? I was able to at least kind of get that going and kind of pick up from where I was. So having that backup, always having a backup plan is really important, because again, you know, the technology, always wants to do it's always going to go, haywire at the worst time ever, like today. And so having that backup is a really good idea. You want to use dedicated internet connections. Don't use Wi-Fi, don't use broadband if you can help it. That's just, or don't use a Wi-Fi like a public Wi-Fi. I mean, that can be a real problem. It's just not something you can depend on in something as important with a meeting with Congress. And then also you want to close all the programs, all unnecessary apps, programs that are drawing, kind of resources and RAM and such from your computer. You want to, have as much resources going to that video tech as you possibly can. You want to avoid that Brady Bunch effect. I talked to you about that already. And also, if you're going to share video, and I really think that this is one of the kind of benefits of video conferencing is video, share video, use video. It's a great kind of resource there. But when you do that, you want to just check, there's some boxes on Zoom and also in Teams. Those I know are platforms that they're using quite a bit. Teams, by the way, is the platform that they are officially using in the House. And GoToWebinar is what they're using in the on the Senate side, sort of officially, but they're using all sorts of video platforms. We know that as well. I hit the wrong button. Come on. There we go. So let's talk now. I'm going to just kind of close it up. Hopefully in about 2 more minutes, if that works, Jen, and just talk about follow through and how important that is. So, if any of you are golfers, you know how important follow through is when it comes to golf. If you don't have a good follow through, the ball is going to go anywhere else but where you want it to. I know when I ever played golf, it usually went right down the fairway, but it was always a couple of fairways over from where the one I was actually going down. Follow through is really important. The same thing happens for meetings. If you have bad follow through, your meeting isn't going to get the results that you want it to have. So it's really, really important to have good follow through. And we know that constituents frankly fall down on the job when it comes to doing good follow-up, because we ask this question of staff. We ask, do constituents generally follow up with you in a helpful or a timely manner? And what we found is about 85% of those who answered that question basically said no. Either they don't follow up in a timely manner, or they're not helpful, or both. So we know that that's a place where constituents could stand a lot of improvement on. I don't think that it's because people mean to not do the follow-up. It's because people go back to their daily job and they get busy, and then time goes on, and then they still haven't done the follow-up, and they kind of feel silly about it, right? But it's really, really important to do that follow-up. That's why also, if you have a meeting in person, when we get back to that, make sure you get their business cards. If not, you want to get their contact information, who it was that was in the meeting, so that you can email them to follow up things. And when it comes to emailing with Congress, actually, you want to be able to get that, because if you have the email address, that's something really valuable. Now you no longer have to go through like the web form that general email goes through. Now you can send it directly to the staff person that you met with, or the person who happens to have that issue, your issues on their portfolio. So that's really, really important. And typically you're going to be emailing. This is mostly how people mostly can communicate with staff, is through email. And so when you're talking about email, it's important to keep in mind that they often are because they are getting about 100 to 150 or 150 to 300 emails a day, that a lot of them, they're keeping up with their email anytime they can get. So that's why they have these, their mobile phones are basically surgically implanted in their hands. They're always checking their email whenever they get a moment. So it's important to keep in mind, what platform they might be looking at your email on. Let's look at some bad examples of an email. Here's a bad example of an email. It just goes on and on and on. It's got a really vague subject line. It just scrolls all the way down right below the fold there. This is what you want your emails to look like. You want bullets. You want to have attachments. You want to have a clear subject line, where at least on this PC, you can actually see this actually you can even see this signature there. That is an email where if somebody sees that, they're not going to get totally overwhelmed and move on, right? They're going to go, I can read through this one. Okay, I got it. Here's what a bad email looks like on a mobile phone. I can tell you, love my wife to death, but she sends me texts that are like 400 or 500 words long. And she goes, I get home and she's like, did you read my text? I'm like, no, I didn't read your text. It's way too long, right? So that well-crafted email, that looks a lot better on a mobile device as well. That's something that, the eye can kind of handle and manage, and you don't get overwhelmed in looking at that. So, emailing, after the report, you have a meeting, you email, maybe something relevant happens. After you kind of do that several times over the course of that exchange, eventually, that correspondence kind of turn into a relationship with that staff. That's how you build those relationships. And they'll keep that email, especially if they have a really clear subject line. They will keep that in their inbox, and they'll use it sort of as a way to retrieve that information at a later date. So having those emails is a really important thing to do. One congressional staffer actually said, left me with a quote there where she said, if I've had a meeting with somebody, particularly something that's like time sensitive, and then I never hear about it again, I'm wondering whether it's a priority to the group. So what that says is that, what that means is that if you happen to be, you do have a meeting and then you don't follow up, it actually does send a follow-up message, even though you didn't send one physically. It says, I went and met with you and it wasn't really a big deal. It was really a check the box meeting. I was wasting your time. And that's definitely not the message that you want to leave. Okay, I'm going to close up with this little illustration. There's one last tip I would say, and it's really, really important to coordinate with the national office. I'll give you a personal story of mine. This is Senator Patty Murray. For those of you who aren't familiar with her from a Goodwill perspective, she was like the queen on the chessboard because, she was the first female chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. Goodwill provides services to, or works with people who are, returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, with returning veterans to help them get jobs after deployment. She was also the chair of the Budget Committee. She was also the chair of the Senate Help Committee, which has jurisdiction over all job training programs. Let's talk about funding again. Not only was she chair of the Budget Committee, but she was also the ranking member of the Labor HHS Subcommittee. That's the committee that had jurisdiction over funding for education and labor and job training programs. And oh yeah, she happened to be also, she was like the third most senior member of the Senate, Democrats. And the way that we found out that there had been our Tacoma agency had hosted this really influential, important member for a site visit was because this tweet, that agency tweeted out this particular tweet. And, that's a real loss. We weren't able to give them any information in advance of that. We're lucky that we heard about it because I was able to go in a couple of weeks later into that office and say, hey, I heard you went to the Tacoma agency. How'd it go? That sends a message like, oh my God, they coordinate with one another. But you have to make sure that you let the national office know what you're doing, when you're engaging with members in a way where the national office hasn't facilitated that meeting. At that, I think I'm going to leave it at that. This just really, what I will say is, it just really matters when there's a lot of reasons why this matters. And so, some takeaways though. First off, it's really hard to score. Just remember that getting a bill passed takes an average of about 7 years to pass. And yet it's a lot more about defense. So you want to have a goalie's mindset. I can tell you the amount of legislation that I got passed, probably maybe, I don't know, this thick. Whereas the pages of legislation that I helped to stop probably stacked to the moon and back, right? So it's a lot about defense. It's not just about getting bills over the goal line and getting to do a rose garden signing ceremony. And then lastly, make sure that you celebrate your wins. Wins are a win. Sometimes they don't even seem like a win at the time, but they're a win. It's really important. And those wins, even the small ones that don't get any ink, can actually have really long lasting impacts. So remember to celebrate those wins. And at that, I'm just going to leave you with this last quote. It comes from our third president, Thomas Jefferson, who said, we in America do not have a government by the majority. We have a government by the majority who participate. So I want to thank you all today for your participation and your patience. And if we have questions and we want to have a dialogue, that'd be great. I'd be happy to stick around. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh God, that was
All
really
right.
scary.
I see our first hand from Joel and Mike.
All right, I'm gonna stop this here.
Joel, Michael Morgan, and then David.
Well, thanks for all that. It was very interesting. And
my pleasure.
So in a society, we often have a layered situation. We have a couple of people for the AAS, Joel Parrott and Kelsey, who actually know what they're doing. And then we have a lot of amateurs who, can be trained and go to offices and not make a fool of themselves. But I'm wondering what the best way for follow-up is in that case, because usually Joel Parrott or Kelsey talk about being in close connection with these people. And so I get the sense that congressional visits are part of it, but it's not obvious that all of these people, some of them occasionally loose cannons, should be the ones speaking to the staffers and congressmen. I'm wondering if you could comment.
Uh-oh.
Did we lose Seth again?
I think we did. I was like, I don't see.
Well, we're really having a Zoom gremlin day.
Yes.
Well, I would be interested if anyone else on the call has a perspective on that question. I think that's a key challenge. I'm wondering if anyone else has dealt with that.
Yeah, so for my perspective is on the receiving end, and Joel is a huge asset for you all. And I've known Joel since his OMB days, and our relationship didn't really change between when he was at OMB, we were both in government, and when he went to AAS, because I would still call him and be like, hey, Joel, here's what we're working on. Here's what I need. Are you guys going to weigh in? Do you have policy suggestions? Can you do a letter of support? That type of thing. And so it's having those relationships and speaking the same language, right? I could call Joel and dispense with my ask in about 30 seconds and move on with the day. So it's again, having that experience and the common language is a huge asset to organizations.
Yeah, you probably don't remember, but I met you some years ago in a visit stay. And there were real budget problems, and you asked essentially for our help. And I thought, wow, we're immediately out of our depth. But someone like Joel Parrott wouldn't be.
So. Yeah, I definitely would. One of them, and I don't remember specifically what the issue would have been at the time, but an example that I use regularly were years ago, a bunch of climate scientists had come in. They were doing their congressional visits day on the Hill. And I was unfortunately one of their last meetings. And I said, so have you been talking to the members and offices about what you need? And they said, oh, that seems too self-serving. And I said, what? I said, who else is going to ask for it, right? I said, you have to go in and ask and say, you can give kind of a baseline, but then you have to be able to ask for what you need. And they were, again, unfortunately, I was one of their last meetings, but I'm like, the science community in general has an issue with that. And I would see that a lot, particularly again on the academic or scientific constituencies.
So I'm back. Michael, you had a question about follow-up, correct? Was that?
Which my
all right, well, I'm rejoined. I didn't have one explicitly on follow-up. Worst technology meltdown I've ever had. And I've had some before, but this is the worst. Apologies again.
This is more a comment. First of all, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
One of the words I was expecting to hear, and maybe you said it and it just went right by me. In addition to the notion of building relationships with the various offices, is also this notion of credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from the physical sciences, I mean, we look at data, we interpret it. That's being credible makes you a source that folks that you're meeting with in these offices will come back to you again and again. Mm-hmm. And what are are there any particular suggestions in making sure that people have solid credibility so that they're seen as a reliable partner in this whole process.
Yeah, and there was one kind of, this kind of speaks to the comment earlier, about, we have some people that really they're good at having the conversations there, and other people that are, kind of newbies, and they don't, they're not so sophisticated and things like that. As I kind of said earlier about the, you want to know your issue. It's important to, be familiar with it. But I think a lot of times people who, unless you're a government affairs official or a person like me, you don't need to know the difference between between a budget reconciliation bill and a budget resolution necessarily, unless of course it's like part of the conversation, like it actually is right now, right? If you're thinking about like infrastructure bill, that's one of the things that they're thinking about. But you're a constituent, and they kind of understand that you don't speak the legislative lingo and all that, and that really the issue of credibility, the way you demonstrate that you're credible is, number one, I talked about being able to talk to, all different aspects of the issue, not just because you care about it. This is my position, and that's all I'm going to tell you about. I'm not going to tell you the other kind of negative things that maybe you might need to consider. I think they really appreciate it when people do that, and the fact that 95% of the people can't do that is a really big problem, right? And then the follow-up. I'll never forget when I was with Goodwill, I was shadowing a person at a few of their meetings. And this was a person who was like on our board. I think he'd been at Goodwill. He'd been working for Goodwill's probably 30, 35 years. He'd been a CEO for probably 25 of those years. Somebody who, he was on our policy committee, somebody who should have been, fairly familiar and kind of able to have these conversations. And he was just terrible. It was just like, wow. And it was obvious that he never, ever engaged with that office or any of these other offices, except for when he showed up at our flying events. And they were just like, and you can tell that's not a relationship. It's a check the box kind of meeting. And everybody knows that, I hope that answers your questions a little bit, kind of went all over the map there. But there's a lot to that. It's a big question.
We have David Halpin next.
Yes.
So as individual scientific societies, and even more so AIP as a federation of scientific societies, we spend a not inconsiderable effort writing these letters, letters signed by multiple societies, sometimes many societies, sometimes with universities involved. And they're always addressed to the chairs or maybe even the majority minority leaders. And I've always been somewhat skeptical about the impact of a single letter sent in, on some particular subject, end of story. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, yeah, I think those letters actually have a lot of impact, especially because think about it, those letters are being directed at the committees. They're not necessarily, usually they're not directed at like all the members. They're usually specifically at the committees. And I'll tell you one thing, like personally, when I was a lobbyist, I really focused most of my efforts to build the relationships with the committee staff, because a lot of times, I mean, actually, I did this research a few months ago, where I looked at all the legislation that had been introduced, not the last Congress, but the one before. So I guess it was the 115th, where I looked at all the bills, just went to congress.gov and said, how many bills got introduced, how many got considered by committees, and so on and so forth. Of a little over 11,000 bills that were introduced in that Congress, only 18% of them ever got considered by a committee. So they're like, that's didn't get through the first hurdle. And think about that, a chair or ranking member, that's a big deal, because they're the ones that get to choose whether or not the bill is going to get considered or not. And also, the staff that are on those committees, those are the ones where a lot of times you get the phone call, hey, we're getting ready to draft a science bill. And, they call up, the American Institute for Physics, et cetera. And then they'll say, hey, can you come in and give us some specs about what do you think that we ought to include in this really important bill? But also a lot of times staff will even ask for those letters because they want to be able to demonstrate all the different, how many groups support this and how it's important. So those letters are really, really they're important, and usually those are being circulated because it's part of a broader strategy.
If I could just ask a follow-up question to David's, directed to Anne in particular, of course, because you were committee staff, and I know you also are involved in the NASA coalition developing the letters currently on that topic. So I'm curious how you when you were on the Hill, how you interpreted these types of coalition letters, and how, being on the other side of the fence now, the approach you're taking in trying to make them actionable.
So when I was, we were heading towards a markup, and there was, say, take America Competes as an example from, years ago. And people would send in letters with a lot of societies or groups supporting. That always made a difference. And so before a markup, as the senior committee staff, I would send a memo to all the members on the committee. On the Democrat, I supported the majority at the time was the Dems. And so every Democratic member on the committee that would be in that markup had my memo in front of them. And so I would put there'd be a background section, then I'd go through the legislation, there'd be a section by section. And then towards the end of the memo, there would always be a section on like position of the parties. And so what's everybody saying? And so I would put down, we have these letters of support, we have these letters of opposition, here's their view, here's their points, here's what you need to know, because then they know what they're voting for, right? So it's kind of I would do a crash course of, here's the 10 pages of all the relevant material that helps you vote on this particular legislation. So I completely agree with what Seth was saying, that a unique letter from an individual to a personal office matters a lot, but to a committee, if you have something from AIP with X number of societies signed on, I definitely use that. And then normally what I would also do is go through and pull all your membership rosters. And so I would say, this bill represented with these members represents 75,000 people or something like that. And then I would try to also do a geographic distribution from, they have members in all 50 states or whatever it happens to be. And so that's how I would use it to sell whatever bill we were moving towards markup.
I actually, to kind of piggyback on that point, I've seen also where groups have done like, let's get sign-ons from not just national organizations, but the local groups as well. And I know of one person, I was like, wow, that's brilliant, where he took the letters and when he would have meetings, in personal offices or committee offices, he'd go and he had that letter, and then he'd go and he'd circle. He'd be like, this one, this one, this one, these are in your district. Which was, just a really great way to be able to kind of demonstrate that, illustrate that there's local impact right there, right? Like these are, association leaders, community, kind of pillars of the community, people who run like the Goodwill or the Goodwill or the United Way in the area, and they care about this, and they agree as well.
So I would say that, following on from Anne's comment, that when letters are drafted from federations or individual member societies, doing a little bit of the work for the committee members in terms of getting those numbers of constituents that might be represented, number of individuals that are in an individual member society, getting that geographic distribution, making the life easier for the committee member that's going to be putting a memo together to have that information right at their fingertips, so they don't have to search for it, and making sure that it's accurate is a key way to build a positive relationship. If they're working hard on lots of different things, if you can give them reliable information quickly, and timely, and not have them have to dig for it. That's great.
Speaking of those memos, some advice I forgot to tell you is when you're sending those like 1 to 2 pagers, or whenever you send, make sure it's something that they can cut and paste, like not a PDF. Because staff do have to do these memos, and you want to make their job easier. Don't make them have to sit there and take out the line breaks, because you send them a PDF. Send it in Word or something like that, so they can cut and paste. The best thing that can happen is they take your words verbatim and put it in a memo to the member, right?
I used to always forbid everyone who worked for me from doing that, but yes, staff do that.
We had a question in the chat, Seth, and Rudy, I see you coming up next here, but the question was if you could talk about social media and its role in influencing and communicating, and whether there are any tips on engaging through social media.
Absolutely. Great question. Yeah. So we actually have a report on our website. It's called #SocialCongress. It's from a study that we did in 2015 on social media. We actually updated or did that survey again, some of those questions with the National Journal in 2017. And we basically got pretty much the same data, with the exception of, it being like, being a tool that allows them to have, helpful dialogues. Didn't do so well in 2017. I don't know why that would have happened. But here, let me tell you about how kind of members of Congress really use their social media. And it's frankly the way most of us use social media, right? You post things to your social media platform, to your profile. And then, just like the rest of us do, you kind of sit there and look at how many likes did you get on your post, and and you look at all the comments to your post. Not necessarily, if people don't post at your page or something like that typically, but like that's what members are looking at, and they're using it more as basically a way to kind of put out information about their message, what they're involved in, and then they kind of sit back and they want to kind of look and see what the reaction is. So they look at those comments and they look at the likes and all that stuff, and it helps them to kind of get a judge of what the reaction is to whatever it is that they just put out. So it could be like, oh, I was just at a site visit where I visited this university's research center, or, and then they'll look and see whether or not that was positively or negatively kind of responded to on those social media. It's almost like kind of putting your finger up in the wind to kind of see that. It's not the most like political, most scientific way to kind of gauge constituent views, but it's how they use it. Here's the thing. So you also, one thing with social media is that it doesn't take a lot of similar comments to a post, though, to get the attention of a member. It only takes about fewer than 30, where like if you're sending email campaigns, you have to have hundreds of emails, that to get the member's attention. Now it goes down if you're a VIP. If you have 10 VIPs from the community, that's about the same. But it only takes about 30 or fewer kind of consistent or similar email or comments to that post for them to get the attention and kind of get a sense of like, oh, I see there's this reaction here if you have those similar comments. The issue is also you don't have a lot of time to do that. You have basically about 24 hours to get those kind of comments there, because you think about that. Remember the data I put out there, 28 meetings a day. So if you wait 72 hours later, I don't know, I'm bad at math, but that's a lot of meetings ago. If you wait 3 days ago, 3 days to post, it's more than 70 meetings ago. They just move on quicker than that. So you have to be quick. And that's why it's important to read the newsletters of the national organizations and societies that you belong to. I can say for a fact that, I used to do a lot of those legislative updates and newsletters myself. I can tell you I did not do them for my health. They were kind of a bear at some points. But the reason that we did that is to keep our people informed, so that when, they could kind of have a heads up, like, oh, we would let them know, like, there's probably going to be a markup on this bill in a couple of weeks, so that they could be kind of ready to be able to do a tweet if they needed to, and turn it around quickly.
Rudy?
Yes, I would like to get some comments from this on potential strategies for organizations to pursue a certain important point in their agenda that they want to raise by Congress or get support. I view these individual contacts with the congressman as basically, if you promote some industry or some value to the congressman's district, that's only 1 out of 500 congressmen and 100 senators. So we are really fairly small subgroups, our individual society. Some are larger than others, but we are not a trade organization who can throw hundreds of professionals onto the hill and convince a lot of congressmen on the importance of what they are after. So what should a society, even AIP or member societies of AIP, if they have a certain goal that they want to pursue or certain legislation passed, whether it's the astronomers, they wanting another telescope, or the high energy physicists want another accelerator or something like that. How do we do this?
Well, you want to be strategic, and you start with, that data point that I told you about, the 11,000 bills that got introduced, only 8% got through the first hurdle, and it's the committees, right? So it's those committees. The committees are like they're the engine of Congress. They do the bulk of the work of the Congress, and so that's where, if you happen to have, so you focus on not all 535, or actually it's 541 if you want to include delegates too, but if you're just kind of doing scattershot and hoping something sticks like spaghetti to a refrigerator, that's not a very strategic way to go about it. You want to focus on the committees that are going to have jurisdiction over the issues. So if you have something that's science related, you want to be looking at the committees that have jurisdiction over commerce, science, state committee, or the different committees that have kind of jurisdiction over, maybe it's NIH because of some of the research. But looking at those specific committees can really help you kind of hone in, especially if you don't have a lot of resources. Another thing to think about though is, so when I got my job at Catholic Charities, I was really fortunate because the person who hired me was actually the person that Catholic Charities had hired to basically put them on the map. They, amazingly, a 90-year-old organization really didn't have a government relations department yet. And that person, so I got to basically kind of help her and observe her as she kind of put that whole program together. And one of the things that we did was we developed strategic kind of priorities of legislative issues, right? We had a really long list of issues that we cared about. It's Catholic Charities is like soup to nuts, right? There were like 35, 40 issues on there. And so we had to be really calculating about it. So we asked ourselves certain questions like, okay, is this legislation likely to move? Is this one where if we don't work on it, nobody else will? Or is this one like, oh, we can work in concert with others? You can ask certain questions to kind of help you to at least, maybe it's on the agenda, but it's not the highest level priority. Maybe it's one where you're just watching it because you want to make sure you don't get burned if something sparks. So that can help you kind of dose out your resources a little bit. But again, from a strategic way, about like a legislative strategy, you start with the committees and you just focus on those districts. So you don't need to worry about 535 of them. You have to worry about like 30.
Are those committees that you talk about, are they receptive to meet people?
They want to meet with their constituents, right? So that's one thing that a lot of people get frustrated with the structure of our government, is they're like, well, I don't have the person on that committee and I want that, so that's why what that person has the ability to do is go talk to their member to say, hey, can you go whisper in the ear of somebody who's the chair or the ranking member, somebody who's senior on that committee. But if they try to go and have a meeting on their own with the member, it's not going to happen. They literally, like, if you try to write a letter, it gets filtered out. And the scheduler is going to be like, are you a constituent or not? And you don't want to misrepresent, like, and say, oh, I'm a constituent, and you're not. That's a really big no-no. Yeah. That'll definitely get you, that'll end your relationship right at the beginning. So that's why also, though, when I work with groups and the work I did, we really looked at, like, okay, who is in that district, and who of our members is in that district, and we'd bring them in. Like, for example, we were dealing on a bill that had to do with consumer product safety. We had a problem with a consumer product bill, a consumer safety bill, and the chair in the Senate committee on the Commerce Committee was Mark Pryor at the time. So we brought in the CEO of the Little Rock, Arkansas agency to talk to him, right? So that's where you can also be, people in key districts are the ones where you want to be working with them to get them to be involved. And a lot of times people don't realize that, they're a more influential person because of that committee, right? And I was talking about, the example, for example, like, Robert Byrd. Okay.
That said, though, this
Kristen?
gets to the
Sorry,
difference. Sorry, the committee staff versus personal office staff. I would meet with anybody who had subject matter relevance to whatever I was working, whether you were a constituent or not.
Yeah. Committee staff is different, but I'm talking about like if you go into a personal office because they happen to be on the committee, that's an issue. And the committee staff, yeah, they would meet with like that's who I met with primarily. That's what most of my meetings were with those committee staffers. And yeah, occasionally we'd bring in people from wherever. But again, the person who was like, we also brought in people that happen to be from the district if we could, because it just makes a difference.
Kristen, I saw you had your hand up for a while. I'm not sure if you still are available.
Hi. Sorry, I have a little bit of bandwidth issue. Excuse me. This is Kristen.
Oh, how dare you have computer problems?
I know, right? Seriously. I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the opportunities with respect to state-based staff and state directors. It's something that we found really effective in terms of the relationship building. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we actually asked the question of like, who should you try to build relationships with? And it's not the chief of staff, it's not the scheduler. The two people that you want to build relationships are the first one is the legislative assistant that has, science and, whatever the issue is on their portfolio. And the second one is the state or the district director with like, I think it's like 68% said district director. Here's the thing about a district director. Number one, they're right there in your backyard, they're in your community. This is the person where if you know them, you might bump into them while you're gassing up your car at the Circle K on a Friday night. And you could go up to them potentially like, hey, we had a meeting a few weeks ago at the Washington office. We were asking about, this science bill that we're working on. Is there an answer on that yet? And I guarantee you, if that district director doesn't know the answer, as you're pulling away from the Circle K, they're on their phone calling the Washington office because they don't want to bump into you next Friday night at the Circle K and not have the answer, right? Also, something that's interesting to know is that state and district directors tend to be the longest tenured staff working on, for Congress. The average tenure for like a legislative assistant is like 1.7 years. The average tenure for a district director is 11 years. And so, they really have a lot of institutional knowledge. And then lastly, what I would say is when you're a member of Congress and you're thinking about like, who are you going to hire for different positions, like legislative director, chief of staff, those Washington positions, you're thinking about people who understand Capitol Hill, the political process, the policymaking process. If you're thinking about who are you going to hire for your district director, you're thinking about, who's the person I wouldn't mind being stuck in the car with for 6 hours in a snowstorm driving down the interstate. So you're going to hire somebody that you really trust and somebody who's got your ear. So they're a really, really important person to get to know. And it's great because they're right there in your backyard. You can go down there and have meetings with them. They're just really accessible. And they're kind of the sole forgotten staff person because they don't work in the Washington office. They're great ways to be able to engage with them too, like going to town hall meetings and other things, district events, they'll be there. Does that answer your question, Kristen?
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
We've been through our society trying to essentially leverage the state director. That's why thank you for highlighting. Yeah,
you're welcome. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great, it's a great strategy, and with, August recess is coming up, so there are going to be lots of opportunities to engage with people back home. And so one thing I would just sort of kind of emphasize again is that story I talked about with Patty Murray, right? Because a lot of those kind of in-district events, those are the events that, often happen where they're not facilitated. So you're off, the national office isn't going to know that you necessarily had a meeting in the district unless they help you to arrange it or something like that. That's why, it's really important for you to, if you do have some contact, for you to let them know. I like to kind of say if the meeting happened and I don't know about it, didn't happen, right? Sort of like that old cliche goes, if the tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it. You know. Other
Michael
questions?
Morgan?
Yeah, I know one of the things that we'd like to talk about and discuss is, you know, many of the member societies, as well as our membership societies, as well as the member societies of the Federation, kind of look back and say, okay, we've invested resources in our efforts for advocacy and outreach. What are some effective ways of measuring the impact of those, given the relatively long lead times on some of these?
It is
you know,
my
you're advocating for
favorite
something.
question. I love it. Thank you for asking that question. I can't believe, I mean, if you'd have asked me 6 years ago, if I would celebrate a question about metrics, I can guarantee you I wouldn't have. But you know, but you guys are all scientists, and I'm sure that you're different. But you know, I was a political science major. You know, but let me tell you something about metrics. So yeah, everybody wants to be looking at metrics, and unfortunately, I think a lot of lobbyists, they're like me. You know, political science, history people, kind of liberal arts type of people. And they're not necessarily data geeks. And in this day and age, you need to be. Here's the unfortunate part is, so when you're thinking about like, oh, what are my measures? What are the outcome measures? Well, you know, if you're a lobbyist, you think to yourself, well, an obvious metric I could show is like that demonstrates outcomes is I got a bill passed or not, right? But your chances of getting a bill passed, I mean, it's a lot like a game of chutes and ladders. You know, there's so many different sort of pitfalls that aren't your fault that can happen. So that's not something that you want to necessarily stick your head on the chopping block for. So then, you know, you sit there and go, okay, well, we can't tie into that. And so what a lot of groups use is what we could just call common measures. So it's like, you know, stuff it's data that's easily accessible, you know, and so easy to collect. And, you know, it basically is very tactical kind of metrics, like how many emails got sent to Congress, right? How many meetings did we have? But that doesn't show that you were effective, that the strategy was effective. I'm actually writing a blog about this that I think we'll probably post on Monday. And here's the idea. Attached to something. So if the ask was, please co-sponsor a bill, then, you know, go back a few weeks later after the campaign has run its course and see whether or not any of the members that were contacted by their constituents took the action requested. You know, that at least ties it to something. And it's not like, okay, it's not so far down the road of like, oh, the bill got passed, but it does measure like, okay, the strategy in this part of this effort was to get co-sponsors, you know, trying to move the needle forward. We had people ask for that. And when we did, we got this many members to actually do it. And I honestly also think that it's important to take measures, like things that you count, different types of numbers, not just necessarily using one, you know, just counting numbers, but sometimes you get really, really meaningful numbers by blending them together. You know, for example, I'll give you a Goodwill example. Back in my Goodwill days, we had you know, every agency had to send in their monthly finances, right? Their budget sheet, their balance sheet, and you know, there was, you know, what are your earnings, and what's your revenues, and what are your liabilities? We called it an E to R ratio, right? So earnings over, or was it? It was liabilities over it was earnings over like their loans and stuff, like their liabilities. And what they did is they divided one and the other, and they got an E to R ratio. And so like, here's the thing, like if you have a Goodwill agency and it makes $100 million a year, and another Goodwill agency that only has $10 million a year, makes $10 million a year, like which one's the better Goodwill? Well, the one with $100,000. But then you go, well, yeah, but they spend, this Goodwill that makes 100 million spends $110 million a year, and the $10 million one only spends 100,000. Now, which one's the better Goodwill, right? So sometimes like when you take two numbers together, you can get a much more meaningful number with them combined than you would get separately. And it's a matter of just getting creative and thinking through like, okay, which numbers could we use that might give us like a ratio or some sort of a rating that would be really meaningful. You can weight things, I would do that. I think about maybe one metric could be, so there's the idea of like, one is the measuring things like by taking the measuring your strategies or your tactics by attaching it to something that happened. Another one is think about the, from like the relationship based. So, okay, how many individuals in key committee districts or key legislator districts and states do we have who are at the level where they're sophisticated enough and they're responsive enough that we could, if we ask them to do something like pick up the phone, they would do it. And which ones of those actually, if they picked up the phone and did that, how many would get the member to call them back within like a day? So there are lots of kind of metrics that you can use that are meaningful beyond those common metrics. Sorry, that was a rambling answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
Thanks.
I think I might take the last question unless there's anybody else. One of the things that I get asked a lot when I'm training scientists to do congressional visits is, should we talk about politics? Should we tell people if we voted for them?
I think it's important to keep politics out of it. Obviously recognize, I mean, it is, especially during election years and things, where like, maybe they're in a rough campaign, you might want to say, oh, talk about, yeah, I know it's been a big campaign, you've got a challenge going, something like that. It's fine to acknowledge that. But to sit there and say like, I voted for you, I didn't vote for you, or, you definitely don't want to say things like, I gave to your campaign, anything that puts you in a position where it looks like you're going to do quid, you're now asking for a quid pro quo. And, that was a phrase that everybody got to hear a lot about a year or so ago. That's illegal. It'll get you in jail. So we want to make sure you don't end up going to prison. So keeping the politics out of it and keeping it to the issues. And, I think it's really important to just be as nonpartisan as you can be. From my perspective, that's what I had to do. And I think every group here, it would be the same. You're nonpartisan, not taking that out of it. And sometimes that can be hard, and it's kind of a skill to learn, not to kind of tip your cards, about which way you lean, because you're going to have people that you have to work with from all different sides. And some people you agree with and some you don't. And again, that's why it's important, that 95% number about couldn't understand the negative aspects of the bill is a really big issue. If you go into a member's office and they basically oppose most everything and you're just like, I can't speak to that, I don't understand it.
So I might sneak just one more in.
So, I'm here all day. Try the field.
We're at 2:55 and I want to respect everybody's time. So we get questions from climate scientists, for example. Should I go into an office of somebody that I know is a climate change denier?
Should I go into an office of a client of somebody who is a climate change denier? If you're,
I mean, I've had climate scientists, right, doing a congressional visits day and want to know, right, if I know my representative or if I know, this particular representative is a climate change denier, should I still go in?
Yeah, let me tackle that. So, that's basically the question is, how do I deal with a member when they just diabolically oppose the issue? And, here's the thing. For number one, especially on issues like, that are like kind of those big, really contentious issues, it's unlikely you're ever going to get a member on it that's clearly stated a position on a contentious issue that they're going to change their mind because, nobody wants to be a flip-flopper. So in fact, there was one member of Congress where we asked, like, what would it take your member, or it was a chief of staff, we asked, what would it take for your member to change their mind on an issue where they stated a position? And the answer was a gun to her head. So it's difficult to get members to sort of change their mind. However, think about this as advocacy is a long ball game. It is. You may not necessarily agree with that member on the climate issue, but down the road, there may be an issue that you can work with them on. And so having that meeting regardless is important because you're building a relationship and a rapport with them whether or not you always agree with them. And, being able to acknowledge, like, we don't always agree. So having that meeting, you can even go in and just sort of frame it that way. Like, look, acknowledge, I know that your member is, has stated their position on this issue. They don't believe that the client that in climate change. I'm here to talk about climate change today, and here's why I care about it, and here's my reasons why, etc. This is the impact on the district or state. Here's a personal story about it. This is what we're asking for. I understand it's probably not something that you're going to do. Maybe have a different ask. It's like maybe the ask is just, hey, I know you're not going to vote yes on this. How about you just go on vacation that day? Or there might be something that they can work with you on later on, that's totally different. I hope that helps. I will say one story. There was only one time where I ever said, dude, don't bother. And we had a Goodwill CEO who he was actually he had the honor of being the person who had the second to last child in the United States to have polio. And so his legs didn't work, and he was his legs were weak, and he was in a wheelchair, and he had to go meet with Ron Paul. And we'd met with him for years and years and years. And Ron Paul already announced his retirement that year. It was in the spring, so we had like 6 more months left in office. And the meeting before that, Ron Paul had actually walked over the guy's wheelchair to get to his office. Ron Paul himself, it was so rude to him. And it was raining, and he had to go to his, the CEO needed to go to the airport too. And it was just like, he was going to go do his meeting and then go to the airport, and it was pouring rain. And I was like, he's like, are you sure? I'm like, no, okay, skip that one. So under really, really extreme circumstances, maybe, but otherwise, you're going to have a relationship. These people, most members of Congress, like they're in safe districts. They're going to be there for a while, most likely. Any other questions?
Michael Maloney, did you want to do closing remarks? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, Seth, I think we'll probably call it there. I want to be respectful. People are already jumping off for calls on the top of the hour. So thanks so much to everybody for participation. We really hope that this will spark some discussions within the member society communities, within our PPAC and PPLC committees as well. And that was the purpose of the call, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation. But thank you so much, Seth, and I'm sure we'll be in touch as we move forward.